Between Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. Pancreatitis continued. The summer of 2019 was an exciting one for Hubs. It was an endless nightmare of feeling rotten, steadily losing weight, trying to find a way to get some nourishment into him, more and more tests, and finally getting to a point where we could see a specialist. In July, we talked to our surgeon, who we'd been dealing with all along. This is the doctor who had told us in March that as far as the pancreas is concerned, great care is required, and if you don't have to do surgery, it's best to try to avoid it at all costs. We found ourselves in his office in July. The doctor agreed that unfortunately the cyst had not gone away as they had hoped, but had gotten bigger. He had been chatting with his colleague in Hamilton all along, and it was agreed upon that it was time for Hubs to go see the specialist, and that would probably result in surgery. At any rate, it was decided that what he needed was a feeding tube so he could get more nourishment and gain some strength before an important surgery to get rid of that troublesome cyst. He advised in the meantime that we should get meal replacement shakes to build up the nutrients Hubs was missing. So Hubs would check into the hospital in late July, and the next day or so they'd take him on an exciting excursion to the main hospital in the next town over, and he'd have a feeding tube inserted. This caused me all kinds of internal turmoil and anguish. It was very close to our annual vacation. For the past many years, we enjoy a week in a lovely trailer at a vacation spot on the lake. It's about the only super exciting thing we do all year, so it's always been very important. Would Hubs miss this year's vacation? Would he be there with a feeding tube? What the hell would it be like in vacation land with a feeding tube? This probably means there'd be no way he'd be allowed to go swimming in the lake, right? Would I be able to handle the feeding tube? Do it right? Not fuck up anything with my ineptitude and hesitancy? Questions. Fretting. On the morning of July 22nd, we got into the car to take Hubs to check into the hospital. Don't Stop Believin' was playing on the radio, and it made us cry. I just desperately wanted things to start moving in a better direction of actual hope. He had to wait a couple of days to be scheduled in for the feeding tube procedure. He was transported to the other hospital, prepped for surgery and ready to go. They actually started the procedure. The air pump was up Hub's nose and down his throat, and air was blowing into it. But the cyst was too heavy, and they couldn't get it out of the way properly to get the tube into the stomach. The surgeon told Hubs he could drain the cyst if Hubs wanted, which took him aback, since every other doctor was freaking out about the pancreas. He told him he didn't think it would be a good idea, and that was that. A little day out in the ambulance and then back to our local hospital. I don't know if I should have been relieved, but a large part of me was. I couldn't shake the memory of Dad's experience with a feeding tube. It causes me great pain to think about it now. With Dad's motor neuron disease, he was unable to swallow well, and in those last of his days, in the ICU, they put a feeding tube in. It was so upsetting to him that he couldn't stop crying. He was so utterly disturbed that he'd reached this point in his life that he had to have an alien tube in a hole that was punched into his body. I kept thinking of poor Dad's total distress and horror. And then Hubs came back home. Looks like we were going to have some sort of vacation after all, and he would be able to be there and go in the lake if he actually wanted to. At any rate, after learning that the cyst was big enough to be causing a problem with eating, at some point I had an epiphany. And it was all thanks to my years and years of dissatisfaction with my own body and endless dieting. Hubs wouldn't be able to eat much food at one time without that putting too much pressure on that cyst and whatnot. For whatever reason, I thought of my stint of eating little frozen meals especially designed for dieters when I was in my 20s. They weren't the most delicious meals in the world, but they were tasty enough and kind of resembled decadent dinner favorites. Most importantly, they were small. So the next time I went for groceries, I was perusing the lean meals. Many of them were also quite low in fat, and I felt that was important too, since that gallbladder still had stones rattling around in there, like some great, frightening lotto machine of potential doom. I was determined to prevent another gallstone attack at all costs. There was a decent selection of mini dinners, Asian noodle dishes, various chicken and sauce with veg meals, orange beef, stir fries, some lean approximations of favorite Italian dishes. My idea was a success. Yeah, I am taking credit for that one. All I did, it seemed, was brainstorm ways to keep Hubs from croaking, and that was a small stroke of genius. Hubs was delighted to be able to eat something that was excitingly like real dinners again, and not the crazy meals I tried to craft up that were extremely low in fat, and at times, just plain weird. With this, plus the meal replacement shakes, plus an endless supply of grape berry drink boxes for those long nights of burping and indigestion, we managed to keep him out of the hospital until that crucial surgery at the end of August. Thoughts. There are parts of my life that I do not want to revisit. Parts of my life that I am afraid to revisit, perhaps almost desperately so. Parts of my life that I yearn not to revisit. For each period of my life, there is a Karen from that point in time in my mind. The Karen who is still sitting in that ICU room as Dad slowly dies. The Karen 5 years later who was frantic for her husband to get better and could do nothing more than wait and hope for an end to that nightmare. They are just two of many who are pleading with me to not kick those stones back over again. I talk to these other versions of myself, and in their pain and desperation, they beg me to just heap more earth upon these memories and keep them buried, as though having lived through them and survived is good enough, so let's just be done with it. But the problem is, it doesn't always work that way. It reminds me of a hill that sits to the side of a large, lovely nature park. That hill was the city dump for many years, until they moved to a new site. It's a landfill filled with so much toxic garbage buried in layers on top of layers. A layer of garbage and a layer of dirt. And now, if you didn't know what it was, you'd just think it was a hill at the end of one of many paths that you could hike up on a lovely day. It looks nice from a distance. There are long grasses growing on the sides as you climb, but when you get to the top, it's not quite right. Yes, there are deer tracks on it. And yes, things have tried to grow there, but the grasses are strange and spindly. There are thin, stunted trees and shrubs trying to grow there on the top. There are pipes stuck into the ground as well, and Dad had told me once they are there to vent out gases from whatever is rotting below. It's a little unnerving up there, like an unhealthy, alien landscape. Certainly not lush like the land below. And it smells. It smells like the unmistakable, sickly, sour, sweet, awful smell of garbage. I can only imagine that when it rains, the water that seeps into that hill and runs through it to the streams below is toxic, poisonous. This was the city dump for years and years, long before there was any idea of recycling or proper disposal of anything. And that hill is like how I have been holding all this garbage in, over years and years, heaping more dirt over it, off-gassing it a little here and there when absolutely necessary. And it all looks fine, especially when the sun is shining down on it. But it's not a good, clean, pure base for anything healthy and new to try to take hold and grow. So I take these Karens of the past by their hands. They are so sad and so afraid of going through this shit again. And I tell them it's okay. I'm going to go through this for us. I'm going to clear the land for a new garden. And I can do it because I am strong, and I've had enough of this shit. Yes, I am afraid too, and it hurts like a motherfucker. But I am going to keep going, and I am not going to stop. And then, once the land has all the garbage cleared out, and the stones that get in the way of the flowers cleared out, and all of that toxic garbage bulldozed out and leveled, it is going to be more like the beautiful, peaceful meadow we wanted to grow in the first place. And all the stones can be arranged as markers to show each and every victory. But yes, I am afraid too.